Hello and welcome to Tokyo Inklings. My name is CY. You can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on Instagram at tokyostationpens, on Twitter at tokyostationmnh.
My name is Jacob. I'm foodafan on Instagram and on Twitter, and have a blog at foodafan.com.
And welcome. This is episode 35. Thank you everybody so much for being with us. We always say it, but it's all thanks to everybody who listens to this show that makes it possible. So we are really, really grateful. As always, we're going to start off by reading a few reviews. I want to get to one review that wasn't actually written on Apple Podcasts, actually, but it was instead written into us as a question. But I thought, this was a review, so I'm just going to read it. So this review is from Bond Lau, and Bond Lau writes, "Dear CY and Jacob, it is difficult for me to tell you my sincere appreciation for your elegant capturing of the Moon Men controversy. I'm a lover of all writing instruments, but I'm also a person who deeply believes the world needs more positivity. I hope your clear exposition of how the brands we all revere so much, Stereo, Platinum, Pilot, could not exist without Montblanc, Parker, etc. will not fall upon deaf ears. You clearly tried not to go into the political realms, but it's so clear you support a viewpoint that a rising tide raises all boats. I wish more of the world felt as you do. Thank you for a podcast that doesn't just explicate upon the latest Japanese pen scene, but also the touch of humanity you bring on a bi-weekly basis. Sincerely, Bond Lau. P.S. Your title, Tomoe River is the new toilet paper, was so perfect."
Thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Bond. Yeah, we really appreciate that. What we're trying to do is really, we're not a political podcast. I mean, we could probably have another one if we really wanted to go there, but that's not what we are trying to achieve here. We're trying to really bring a lot of information about pens, about stationery, but I think at the same time that's not really possible unless we also put a bit of our personal viewpoints in it, right? I think that's what makes any hobby.
There may be the occasional opinion.
Yeah. And that's always what makes a hobby interesting, is that, different people can approach the same hobby in such different ways. So that's at least what I think. So thank you very much, Bond. We really, really appreciate it. Do we do a second one? Yes, we do. All right. So, the second one is from Shifujin via Apple Podcasts. Excellent content / always enjoy the commentary. 5 stars. Gents, please keep at it. I listen to your podcast every time. I'd like to hear more of your opinions on papers and your thoughts on the differences in quality right out of the box among Pilot, Platinum, and Sailor. Also, if either of you or your guests have any experiences with Hakase. Dan. Well, thank you, Dan. Really appreciate it. I think, right out of the box, I think there's definitely something to say here. The right out of the box experience. That's not something that we usually cover on this podcast. We're usually really more into like the custom or the vintage type of discussion. But I think right out of the box has a very, it has a place among this discussion. I definitely think that we should focus, or at least we should spend some time talking about that. So thank you very much for the idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting thing to talk about, but the problem is that both you and I, like, usually the first thing we do whenever we get a new pen is we remove the nib and put another nib on it.
That is true. But I mean, so many pens come to me that I think I do have a fair share of out of the box experience. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I own a pen that is like as is out of the box. At least not within my personal collection. So it's hard to do like a meticulous comparison as is. But definitely, we can definitely talk about that.
Yeah.
All right. So getting into today's topics, we'll start with my acquisitions as we do, and then Jacob's acquisitions is mostly with what he got at Wagner. So we're going to tie that into the pen trading event report.
Yeah.
And interestingly, my acquisition is also somewhat tied to an event. But first, I want to give a shout out to our listener Jez. from the UK. Jez is very, very kind, and we've dealt with him multiple times. We've helped him acquire pens and then send them to Bookmondo, and he was so kind in sending us a pair of Sylvine Bullet notebooks. Now, I unfortunately forgot to bring it to you yesterday when we met.
Yes.
But I have to say that this paper is very, very nice. It doesn't really show through. There's a little bit of, I wouldn't say it's feathering, but it does kind of have that, that, I don't know how to say it. Because the fibers are not like all even, right? So the edges do have this kind of like zigzag feel to it, which to me kind of feels vintage. I really like that. And the pages come perforated, and I think it's a really nice touch. So I really like this paper. It's got texture, so I think you'll like it too. Next time I see, I'll definitely bring it out to you.
I'm sure you will.
If I remember. The second pen, or the second thing, which I acquired for a customer of mine, is a Blue Ishime Dorsal Fin 2. Now, I wanted to specifically talk about this one because dorsal fins aren't exactly like super common, right? I mean, you don't see them usually just randomly in the stores. Sometimes they might have one, but it's usually like a standard Taminuta color.
Well, if I remember correctly, and I'm very far from a Naka expert, but I seem to recall that they stopped taking orders for a while. There wasn't the dorsal fin, and then it sort of came back as the dorsal fin 2, right?
So the dorsal fin 1 has fins only on one side of the pen. So it only has fins on the cap. And what I understand of it is that the fin itself is actually built up urushi.
Right. Yeah.
The dorsal fin 2 is not built up urushi. From what I understand. The dorsal fin 2 is actually shaped ebonite.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, maybe that would explain then why maybe it was, I don't know, too time consuming to make it the original way, so they found another way of making the pens.
For sure. For sure. And this is the first time that I've seen, at least, a Ishime dorsal fin. They usually tend to be like Taminuri. And I have to say the Ishime is really nice. The blue is just like this shocking electric blue. And super, super nice pen. They told me that this model and this finish is not on the website yet, but it will be. So you will be able to get this. And I got it at the Nakaya event at Itoya last weekend at the same time as Wagner. And this dorsal fin 2, I asked for it to come with a course nib. And the interesting thing about buying it at a Nakaya event rather than just off the shelves is that there are these nib workers who work with you and grind the pen to kind of like fit your angle. Now, I have some things to say about this. First of all, the setup. So they had the sales guy who wasn't really much of a sales guy, but he was like the Eigyo Tanto, but he was just standing there basically. And then there are two people who seem to be like the nib people, or like, the people who actually work on the pens. One of them just stood there and, took questions or something. So it might have been the apprentice. The other one was the actual nib worker. And in my case, it was a lady. I'm not sure what her name was. So as they asked me to fill out this form with like my name and like my address, standard customer information card, they were observing how I was holding the pen. And then I asked for a course. I did not ask for it to be ground because my customer wanted me to grind it to a naginata afterwards. But at the desk when I was writing, so they would look at how I write, and then they would grind the pen just, without even consulting me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they ground the nib.
Well, I'm sure for most for most customers, that's probably might be the right thing
That's a
to
good
do.
thing. Yeah.
You're a bit of a special case here.
So I was hesitant. I was like, should I say something? And then I decided just not to say anything, just to see what they would make. And so they were grinding the pen. I have I think I posted some videos onto my stories.
But sorry, so you really mean grinding? It was not just like chose, just trying to tweak ink flow. They actually removed tipping.
They had the grinding stone there, and you can hear it go. So
okay, that's how. Yeah, okay. I guess some tipping was removed then.
Yeah, but that's the curious thing. When I went back and I looked at it under the loop, I just didn't. I could not tell what the difference was. Like I mean, I heard them grinding at it, but then I just can't, like, because I've seen a lot of platinum coarse nibs. I work with them when I stack nibs. I usually stack platinum nibs because they're very affordable. But I think the way that they ground it was a bit more flat-footed. And very curiously, it hard started.
But I wonder if it was sort of a form of QC actually done, because one thing our Maruzen, which we talk about a lot, when he's selling his Wagner pens, he's saying that he almost always has to do some minor adjustments because the out of the box, I mean, going back to how the episode started,
right.
Out of the box platinum nibs, the quality is all over the place. You often have to make some tweak them,
That's
like
right.
the tines and whatever it may be.
Yeah, and what's interesting when you buy a Nakaya at the event is that the pen, when you choose the pen, it does not have a nib in it.
Right.
So you have to ask for the nib. And then they have like a bag of nibs. And then they have various different like options, right? They have like rhodium, they have like ruthenium, and they have all the nib sizes. So I believe those nibs that are in the bag of nibs should already be adjusted. It doesn't make sense to, like, you know, bring a bag of like random nibs.
At the same time, though, I can see how that can be part of, you know, the purchasing experience. Whether or not they actually do much, you feel like you're getting something personalized for you, especially when you're paying that kind of money. It's nice to feel
That's
like
true.
they are putting the final touches on it to make sure it works just the way you want it.
That is true. And I don't know if we covered this already, but there has been some shady things going on with Nibs.com, where Nibs.com is the US supposedly official retailer, which is not really official at all. It's like unofficially the only place where you can buy a Nakaya like off the shelf in the US is from Nibs.com, because they have some agreement. So the selling point of Nibs.com is that, one, you can buy it without having the waiting time. Two, you don't have to put upfront money. You pay and you get the pen shipped immediately. Three, you can choose the nib size. And of course, you know, somebody tunes it. So what's interesting is that they had been allowing customers to choose music nibs. But as we know, I don't know if we've discussed this on a podcast, but the platinum music nib is not only a different shape and a different feed, but the housing is also different because it needs to accommodate the alternate feed and nib.
Yeah, the feed is Platinum's older one. Like they switched like 10 years ago or whatever it was for all nibs except for the music, right? That's
right. And the feed has more channels for the music nib. And the nib is longer, so there's about 30% more gold in the music nib, which is one of the reasons why it costs so much more. So what they had been doing, what Nibs.com had been doing, is that if you order a Nakaya with music nib, they would take the music nib out, cut off the end, and cut a little notch into the nib so that it would fit on a regular plastic platinum feed. The problem with this is that the regular platinum feed only has one ink channel, and therefore the ink does not actually go under the tines. So in order to resolve this, what they had done is that they would cut diagonal stripes or lines into the feed, kind of, I guess, to redirect the flow of the ink. Now, it is impossible that Nakaya is okay with this, right? Like there's no world in which Nakaya would agree to doing this.
So do we know if they tell the customers in advance about it? Because if they do that, I can see that being like okay as like a sort of an aftermarket thing they do.
Right.
We
know that they do not tell the customers. So I had 2 or 3 people actually come to me, and somebody actually sent me their Nakaya because it was just not writing well. The tines were all over the place. And so they didn't know why the nib was writing so poorly. So they had to send it to me, and then I had to redo the nib. I had to redo the feed, fit it with a new feed. So they do not tell their customers. And I know that at least a few of their customers have come to me asking me if I know why it doesn't work well. So I went and I asked Nakaya, I said, okay, given that the music... Well, I didn't ask them about nibs.com. I asked them, in hindsight I should have, but I asked them, if I were to want a music nib on one of these pens, what should I do? And they said that if you want a music nib, you actually have to wait a few months. So you fill it out, you purchase the thing, and they'll take it back to the factory, and then they will make a new part.
Right.
So they have to make a new part for it to actually fit into the pen so that you can have a music nib.
Right.
So that was pretty interesting to know that, obviously even Nakaya does not just chop off the back of their nibs. And according to some people, I won't mention names because I don't want anybody to get in trouble, but according to some people who are very familiar with nibs.com's operations, they're not telling Nakaya. And Nakaya would probably be very, very angry if they found this out. So, anyways, that was an interesting tidbit that I had learned from the Nakaya people there. And it seems like they might be... I'm not sure if its sales are going so well that they had to add new nib people, or whether the older Yoshida-san is thinking of like fully retiring, because the new lady was pretty young. Yeah. So, anyways, that was the dorsal fin to Blue Ishime.
Yep.
And Jacob, you did a post on Drillog, so you've kind of been like a Drillog influencer lately.
Yeah, I guess so. Yes. So in the previous episode, I said that I finally got my Drillog pen, which I got in a very roundabout way through tax scheme, legally. But since then, I have been using it more. I've been doing various tests, and I have written a blog post with my thoughts on this pen. So if you remember back at Tips last year when it was sort of announced, they had this table, and there was one guy sitting at a table that dipped a Drillog pen in some ink, and then he just wrote like lines for seemingly forever, right? And they talked about how you can write so much on a single dip, more than you can with a glass pen, right? And that was one of the first things I wanted to test. So I got my pen, right? And I just had gotten a new Itoya ink, and Itoya cocktail ink, so I decided to use that ink. And so I dipped my Drillog pen in that ink, and I had this B5-ish notebook, and I started writing. And I could write about after 70 or 80%. couldn't write a full page. Which probably, that's in itself is not a problem, but it's probably a bit less than I had expected. I also noticed that the first few lines, they were very, very wet. Obviously, it's the same thing with glass nibs, but it was even more pronounced here. It's like you're writing with a glue gun, right? It's like you had this like 3-dimensional text because of the surface tension, right? And then it gets drier and drier, it gets lighter and lighter, and then it finally runs completely dry. So I think that was even more pronounced with a Drillog than with a glass pen. And then I also noticed that I had to rotate the pen a few times, right? So I wrote maybe like 40% of the page, and then it ran dry. Then I rotated slightly, and then like some more ink left in another ink channel, so I could write a little bit more. Now that one got dry, rotate a bit, like rinse and repeat a few times. I can't remember having done that with a glass nib, but it might be the same thing. So those were 2 observations, but then I wanted to compare this to a glass pen, but I didn't have a glass pen at the time, but what I had was this Moonman pen, I think it's called N6, which has this swappable nib, so it comes with both fountain pen nibs and with an acrylic sort of fake glass nib. So I thought, okay, let me try with this acrylic nib. So I performed the same experiment with a Moonman pen with the acrylic nib. So I dipped it in ink, and I started writing in the very same notebook, and to my surprise, I could write even longer with the Moonman. Not only that, the ink flow was a bit more controlled, so you didn't have quite as wet lines at first, and I didn't have to rotate the nibs. I thought, that's not quite what I expected. I thought, okay, maybe I had screwed up this experiment, so let me just clean both the nibs. Let me just redo the experiment from scratch. So I did that, and I got the same results again. So then I thought, okay, maybe there's something funny going on with this Itoya ink. It's kind of unusual ink. People this is not the ink that people will normally use. So I thought, what is a very boring standard ink? So I thought, okay, let's try with Pilot Blue Black. So I cleaned the pens again, and I dipped them in Pilot Blue Black, and I did the same experiment again, and got the same result again. It's like 70-ish% with a Drillog, and like basically a full page with the Moonman. I was like, that's not quite what I had expected. So then I talked to Alessa in Xerox, and because she got her Drillog pen before mine. She has a 0.5 version. I had a 0.8 version, so it's slightly a broader nib. And she said that this was not her experience. Her Drillog pen she can write longer with her Drillog pen than with any of her glass pens. So maybe I thought, okay, maybe this is some kind of difference between a 0.5 and 0.8 version. But I didn't have a 0.5 to test with, so I just I did this blog post with my findings. And then Drillog contacted me via Twitter, and I said, like, thanks for writing the post. Could you try just to clean the pen in a slightly different way? So they gave me instructions to use like a toothbrush and like soapy water to make sure I remove any like residual oils in case there were any. So I followed their instructions as closely as I could, and then I redid experiments, and same result again. So then I thought, okay, let me at least try with some other ink. So I tried with Pelican Blue Black instead of Pilot Blue Black. And with Pelican Blue Black, I could write almost a full page. So I thought, that's kind of interesting. So then I recall this measurement, this test done by Shumino Bungabaku. So we talked about Shumino Bungabaku many times, right? There's this magazine that has all kinds of articles and about fountain pens and ink and paper, and they have on a number of occasions tested viscosity and surface tension of popular inks. So I happened to have one of the issues when they did that, so issue 40. So I looked at the table in issue 40, and I found that Pilot Blue Black and Pelican Blue Black, they have almost exactly the same viscosity, so 0.95, 0.97, what is it there, like micropascal seconds or whatever the unit is. But the surface tension was quite different. So the Pelican ink has quite a bit higher surface tension than Pilot's. And I'm wondering if that is the difference, and why I can write more with a Pelican ink. And also, like, to continuation of that, I may be talking nonsense now because I don't know much about chemistry, so I apologize in advance. But I believe that water generally has higher surface tension than your average fountain pen ink. And I suspect, I haven't seen the numbers, but I suspect that these very light, watery toner and limbs inks that are so popular here in Japan, I suspect that unless they have some kind of surfactant, that them all too might have slightly higher than average surface tension. And by extension, I wonder if perhaps they have been, testing and using those things because they are so popular in Japan. So maybe this is a nib that is kind of optimized for the Inkunuma crowd in Japan.
I have to say, I really admire your dedication to testing all of these papers and inks. That must have taken a long time.
My hand was pretty sore after writing a number of pages, yes.
But, after having said all this, what was the better writing experience?
So, I have one particular problem with the Drillog, but that has to do with my large hands. So, I said in the last episode that the pen is a bit uncomfortable in my hand. So I have this model that it has this faceted twisted barrel, right? But the problem is not the facets. The problem is that the pen is almost like a pocket pen and it doesn't post. So it's too small for my hands. But I've had a few other people now testing, like, using my pen. So Keiko tried it, Alessa tried it, a few other people tried it. And no one else has complained about the pen being uncomfortable.
Well, I think the pen is pretty uncomfortable because of the twisted facets, personally.
Okay.
I did sell the exact same model. My bigger issue with the pen is that the capping and uncapping is just so squeaky that I definitely had to lube the one that I had sold so that it would work like without kind of blowing my ears out.
Right.
Every time I tried to uncap it.
There's a bit of that, yeah.
I think if they made it like postable, that would definitely be an improvement, because then it can rest in my hand rather than me having to like just death grip it.
Yeah. I think Brad Dowder said on his podcast that, it's definitely not, he hasn't, I don't think he's tried it yet, but it's definitely not for everyone, but it is definitely an interesting dip pen. And I think there are, other than, the novelty factor, I think there are two reasons why you may want to buy a Drillog pen. The first one is that if you want to do ink testing at a pen show or at a pen meetup, this is the perfect pen for that, right? Because it's not nearly as fragile as a glass pen. So you just cap it and you put it in your pen case on your bag and you go to your pen group meetup, and it's perfect for that.
Yeah.
That's the first one. The other one, which I think we may have mentioned before, but these Drillog nibs, and this is something that Drillog themselves say on their website, they don't have any problem with pigmented or shimmering inks. And remember, we talked a few episodes back about this controversial tweets from the Sase about how glass pens, not all of them, but some of them have problems with pigmented and shimmering inks because the particles just get stuck in the grooves, right?
Yeah.
Interesting, what Drillog says is that it is only the 0.8 millimeter nib, so the one I have, the broader one, that can handle pigmented and shimmering inks well. But Alessa, again, she has the 0.5 version, and she has been using it with all kinds of quirky tonal limbs, shimmering inks, and she hasn't had any problems. So I think that those are two major selling points.
I think also if they made the tip a little bit bigger, like instead of having a 0.8, maybe if they had like a 1.5, I think it would be really good for it would be a good replacement for one of those like Browse lettering pens, the monoline pens. Because then you can use like India inks and stuff like that, so you can be like really a kind of calligraphy use pen as well. I wonder if they're going to bring out like more nib shapes. I hope so.
I asked them about that, and they said yes. Both finer and broader nibs are in the pipeline, so that's going to happen. And I said I would love to try a broader nib, and they said you'll be the first one to test if we come up with a broader nib. So I'm looking forward to that. But obviously, yes, you mentioned monoline lettering, and we talked, I don't know how many times about that with Betchori and how he started like a mono lettering movement in Japan, right? I'm sure that if they make a nib that will be suitable for the kind of mono lettering that he does, that will be a success.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a lot of potential here.
Yeah.
It's just very expensive for what it is right now. Which is fine, you know, it takes a lot of craftsmanship. I'm okay with that. But given that it is so expensive, I really need it to be much more comfortable.
I tried the other ones at Tips, but I just can't remember. Looking at their website, they have some quite interesting shapes. I'm not sure how comfortable those would be, but it's possible that there are some models that would fit my hand better. Another thing, by the way, is that they asked me, you know, we're gonna do this Kickstarter now, and we want to reach out to like Western stationary bloggers and influencers, but we don't know anyone whatsoever outside Japan. So can you help us? So I gave them a few names. So I think we might see some more Drillog reviews and posts coming up pretty soon.
I believe they sent a pen to Mr. Brad Dowdy.
Yeah.
So, anyways, but you know, we're waiting to see what the Western audience think about these pens as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And did you test these on that new B7 paper?
Ironically, no, I haven't. I think Keiko tried it yesterday. Yeah. I haven't tried it myself, but I have. Yes. So let's talk a bit about this paper. So yes. So a few days ago, I talked to Moe, you know, one of those monolettering Instagrammers, and she recommended this paper called B7 Tranext. And I've heard about this paper before, but it somehow just didn't register on my radar, so I didn't really pay attention until she recommended it. But then I said, okay, well, I might as well give it a try. And then I saw that Yamamoto Paper had just started selling A4 B7 Tranext papers. I just put in an order and ordered some Tranext, and I got it a few days ago. And those who follow me on Instagram might be bored with me talking about this paper now, because I've been spamming them with story posts and even a feed post about this paper. So yeah, B7 Tranext is made by the same company that makes Cosmo Air Light. It's called Nippon Paper Group,
which is a huge company, by the way.
Yeah. Most of these stationary paper companies tend to be big. Yes. Yeah. So, and I would say the papers they're similar, but compared to Cosmo Air Light, I will say that B7 Tranext is whiter, and it has a little bit more texture. It's not a huge difference, but it's a bit more texture, and they even call it like a rough jaw or whatever they call it. So that's sort of one of the features of the paper. And just like Cosmo Air Light, it shows like shading and sheen just beautifully. It's also quite light. I think this is like 70 or 75 GSM, but it feels a little bit thicker than that. And apparently that is intentional. They have this production technique called like Kasadaka, I think, where they somehow make it like more low density than normal paper, so that it feels a little bit like softer than regular paper. You tried it, was it yesterday, right?
Yeah, I actually really like this paper. For the record, I hate Cosmo Air Light with a passion. I hate that paper because it's just like, first of all, you could never write with a you can't write on Cosmo Air Light with an ultrafine nib, right? Like it just spreads. It feels like the paper just draws the ink out of the pen rather than the ink being put on the paper. So whatever you do with it, it's like you're writing with one size bigger than what your nib actually is, and it kind of looks just like blobby. It actually reminds me of what ink looks like when you put too much lubricants in them. The B7 Tranix is, as you said, shows sheening. I think not as much as Tomoe River, but still shows sheening quite well. Shows shading again, not as much as Tomoe River, but still quite well. And it doesn't show through on the back, which is a huge upgrade from Tomoe River. The difference is in the writing experience, whereas Tomoe River is much more smooth, in my opinion. The B7 Tranix has a texture that is similar to Cosmo Air Light, where it feels like you're kind of writing a bit on like clouds. But because of the way that the ink shows up on the paper, for me that's much more acceptable.
I would say it still has a little bit of that sort of swelling that Cosmo Air Light has. It's not quite as much, but you get a little bit of that the lines are feathered. Like, they don't feather, they sort of swell like evenly, right?
Yeah.
It's like you type something in Word and then you select it and you press the B button. Yeah, I think the shading in particular looks really good. And the paper is not that expensive. It's half the price of bank paper Takasago Premium. It's cheaper than regular bank paper, and it's cheaper than Graphilo. So I think this could be quite interesting.
So we're gonna buy this paper and make notebooks out of it in time for planner season.
That could be something.
All right, yeah, let's see. But this paper is pretty good.
Yeah.
But you went to Wagner when I went to Itoya the other day, and you got some pretty interesting pens.
Yeah.
You got let's talk about your favorite acquisition from there.
Let me just sort of explain the event first, and then I'll explain the pens from that I got. So I think I said in the last episode that I didn't think I could go to this pen trading event because I would be working. It turns out I didn't actually have to be in the office, but I had to be like reachable and on call. So I went there, but I brought my headset and my IC card just in case I would be called up or asked to come into the office. But if you read Morrison's blog, like before this pen trading event, he always puts up a blog post explaining like how it's going to work, like where it is, the opening time, and so on. And he seemed to think that there would be a queue very early. So he said that it opens 10 a.m. You can line up from 9 a.m., but you can't line up earlier because we're not going to count that. So he seemed to be expecting people lining up early. So I went there between 9:30 and 9:40, and I think I was the fifth person in line. And of course, the very first person in line was the famous or infamous Tsunami-san. He doesn't kid around with this stuff.
So was he buying stuff?
I didn't see, but I assume he bought. I assume he at least looked at the vintage tables and just to see if there was something to add to his 15,000 pen collection. But they were all the usual suspects there. And while waiting in line, by the way, I took some notes. And I used my chubby Moonman Q1, and that pen is quite a conversation starter. Like the moment I started writing with it, everyone wanted to know what pen it was, or where to buy it, and how it feels to write with. So I think that pen is a candidate for pen of the year. it's a smash hit.
Yeah, like Moonman. I mean, sorry to derail the conversation, but last year our pen of the year was the T1, right? Yeah.
It could be the Q1 this way. At least it's the most hilarious pen this year. I love it for that reason alone. But anyway, so around like 10 a.m., I think there were around like 10 or 15 people in total. So it wasn't exactly like a long line. So one of the first things I did when it opened, I went to Mr. Pilot's table. Of course, Mr. Pilot is there. Mr. Pilot is always there, right? I bought some stuff from him, but I also asked him, as we said that I would do, I asked him about these Pilot ES, or extra smooth nibs.
Right.
But he said that those were launched around the time or just after he had left Pilot. So he didn't know. But I bought some pens that I would get in time for tips. So he promised to do the research and get back to me by tips with an update on what happened to these ES nibs. Actually, at another event, we'll talk about that in a second, but at another event I did hear more about the ES nibs. I do have some update on that, but not from Mr. Pilot. But then I went to Tomoko's, to Lichtop's table, right? And she, of course, she had this new sailor-made ink called Kamogawa, and I think you were the first one to tell our little Tokyo group about this ink, like in our Instagram group chat. And I think I made like a snarky comment that it's just like a rebottled Sailor 123 based on the photos.
That's right.
Which is probably not that far from the truth. Well, it's not exactly the same, but there are similarities for sure. But I still decided to get a bottle of that ink because I thought I needed a chromo shading ink for my paper testing. And then Koe, who couldn't come to this event, she wanted some inks. I got some inks for her. And then, since I was there anyway, I asked Tomoko if she was aware of JP Select, if she knew that there was a business selling her pens like systematically at like a close to $150 markup. And she said she is aware of it. She is unhappy about it, but she said she cannot do anything about it. Mm-hmm. The reason why she cannot do anything about it is that although she can limit the number of like purchases per like checkout per transaction to 1, she cannot prevent customers from buying over and over. And apparently that is what's happening. So she has no way of stopping that. And then I asked her, like, what prevents you from just like cutting out the scalper and selling to overseas people directly? And then she said there's a few reasons for that. First of all, the online store that she's using, like the software doesn't have a good, easy way of doing an English version. There's no easy way of offering international overseas shipping and adding the cost for that. She wants to do that eventually, but there's no easy way of doing that right now. That was one of her answers. The other answer, interestingly, is that if we talk about her previous Sailor pen and ink set, it was a Sumisome, whatever it's called. Remember that one?
Yeah.
She said that Sailor doesn't want her to sell the ink, not the pen, but the ink overseas. So apparently the pen itself, not a problem, but the ink, she can only sell the ink in Japan.
I wonder why.
Yeah, that was quite interesting. So apparently there's no restrictions on the pen, but since the ink and the pen is sold as a set, and I guess she didn't want to sell the pen separately, she could not offer that directly to overseas customers.
I wonder if it's an agreement with Itoya USA, because they actually sell Bungabox inks via Itoya Portfolio USA. And I don't think Bungabox actually, is part of that particular deal.
Along for the ride.
Yeah, like you can buy Bungabox inks at like Van Ness or something.
Right.
So maybe there's like an agreement there where if it were to be offered, it has to be offered through Sailor Portfolio.
Yeah, that sounds like a possible explanation. And then I asked, so what about your toner and limb inks? Do you have the same restrictions for them? And then she said, no, not at all. You can sell toner and limb inks anywhere. They don't care.
Yeah, you can sell it out of your garage.
Yeah. Which people frequently do. So I found that to be quite interesting. So then I asked, so what about... No, sorry. Then she said, regarding the Wagner pen, if you want to buy them from overseas, you can buy them from Maruzen. And I said, I know that because I have redirected various customers to Maruzen. But then I said, the problem is that unless you know the email address, or unless you know exactly how to order, it can be quite hard. And I'm not just talking about like understanding Japanese. Even if you're a Japanese speaker, if you go to Maruzen's blog, it can be quite hard to figure out A, that he's even selling a pen, and B, how to go about ordering it.
Right.
And I don't know, either they didn't realize that, or they were just laughing about that. So, I'm not sure if that will change anytime soon, but if you're willing to put in the effort, you can buy Wagner pens from Maruzen directly.
Yeah, and I think like for me, people ask me to buy pens and resell it to them, but I try to avoid selling pens that directly ship overseas, because if it were possible, I would actually just prefer for all of the shops to be able to be purchased overseas. And I had the exact same conversation with Bungabox, and Bungabox we know that this happens, but there's nothing we can do about it. And then I said to them, well, some people ask me to buy your pens and make a grind on them and then sell it to them. And so what Kaoru-san of Bungabox was saying is that, well, if you like do a value-added service onto the pen, right, that's fair, because that's not something that Bungabox offers. But if you're just like selling the pen like without any like value-added service to it, I think that's where it's pretty touchy with the retailers, right? And that, I think that's why, at least for me, JP Select kind of puts a bad taste in my mouth, because JP Select sells every single nib size, right? It's not just like one particular nib size. She's not getting like one or two of them. She's selling every single nib size. And apparently, like, and we'll go through this in a future episode, but apparently she's like this 26-year-old lady out of Yokohama doing this all by herself, which she's trying to kind of like appeal to the, oh, I'm a hardworking business owner, but then you see that their contact site is actually part of a bigger company contact site, and there's so many things that are like where the story just doesn't add up. So that's kind of where it puts a bad taste in my mouth. So I hope that that Licktop is able to find a better checkout system in order to do this. I mean, this doesn't sound difficult to me, right? Like it doesn't sound difficult to just add like $30 as like a pricing option to international shipping. But the second thing is, we know that services in Japan, not just retail services, but also like these internet services, are very much geared to domestic market only. Mostly also because they don't speak English.
There's definitely so Tomoko does speak English, I think. I've heard her speaking English, but I think there's a certain like mendokusai factor to it.
No, I'm not talking about Tomoko. I'm talking about like the company that provides the software for her checkout, for her EC site. They don't speak English. So they don't really care about the outside market, and therefore they don't make products that are like easily usable for people outside of Japan either. So like it's this whole ecosystem that we have here, right, in Japan, where everything is so geared towards the domestic market, that makes it very difficult. And I don't blame people for going to places like JP Select to buy the pens, because sometimes they're the only places where you can get them.
Yeah, that's true. And this is a bit of a tangent, but in a way, I have a bigger problem with Pensacci than JP Select here. And the reason why I'm saying that is that Pensacci, they don't say what pens they're selling. Right? They just make up their own names as if they're trying to hide which retailer is actually selling it. Because in many cases, they are selling pens that the original retailer is actually willing to sell overseas directly. I'm thinking about Nagasawa, for example. I think even Ishimaru sells overseas. But they're not saying this is a Nagasawa pen or this is an Ishimaru pen. They just make up their own names for the pens.
But JP Select does the same thing, and they're also doing this like parts bin swapping pieces. Like, so I'm looking at their Instagram right now, 23rd of June. They posted Sailor Yohira no Murasaki. This pen doesn't exist. This pen is not this was never put on the market by a retailer. This didn't exist. They're selling like the Rosa Mini, and they say it's a Rosa Mini, but they don't say that it's from Nagasawa. In fact, they put it next to the Pentanoto Yushino State, and all they say in the description is very beautiful combination. We recommend this product.
Okay, maybe they're just as bad then.
And I'm still not convinced that they are separate companies either.
Yeah, who knows? There are resellers, big and small, that sometimes they seem at least connected, related.
Yeah.
And then, as we have hinted at before, maybe that is the topic of a future episode.
Yeah.
So
but
anyway,
you did find a very rare item at the next table over.
Yeah. So backtracking with going back to Wagner's, I went to Morisan's table. First of all, I asked if he had any old Wagner pens, and he was just laughing and said, I've sold every single one. I think he's been surprised that for the last 2-3 years there's been a lot of new interest in Wagner pens. I remember going to Wagner events like 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
They'd have all of them.
Yeah, all of them, right? Now they are a very hot commodity. And then I also asked him about we ended up talking about this Moonman Q1, and I said, I read your blog post where you said that you're going to make some ebonite version. Is that actually going to happen? And he said it is not decided yet, but he is definitely thinking about it. But he wants something that is closer to Platinum's glamour pen than the Tombow. And again, as he said, he wants to do it in ebonite, and he definitely wants to put a number 5 size nib. And I said, wouldn't that look like unbalanced, very small nib? And he was just laughing, and that was sort of the point. It sort of added to the humor value, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, as usual, he had a number of pens for sale, and one of the pens was a Conid. And as I told you over chat, I didn't know what model it was, but I saw a Conid for a good price. And since everyone keeps talking about these Conid pens, and I've never really used one myself, just tried yours. And Dan from New York, he always has like a whole big pen case full of Conids. I've tried them briefly, but I never had one myself. And I thought, let me just get one and play with it, and I'm sure I can very easily sell it if I don't like it. So I bought it without even knowing which model it was. Turns out that this is the Minimalistica. And it came with a titanium BB nib, which, first of all, I hated the nib. I hated the nib because this BB nib is, I guess, a Bock nib. It's basically a stub, right? It has no drop. And I don't like stub nibs. Right. But that's fine. I mean, I have a box full of other nibs, so that wasn't really an issue. I like this. The grip section was quite comfortable. I did not like the capping mechanism because I do like the idea of a snap cap, but this is not even a snap cap. It doesn't have that satisfying like Pilot Prera type click, right?
Right, it's a friction cap.
Yes, and then the filling system. This is like the Rube Goldberg of filling system. It's like overly complicated and it's solving a problem that I don't see. It doesn't need to be solved. I understand like the engineering. There's certain beauty in how well made it is and how well it works, but it's just overly complicated for my simple needs.
I actually am a big fan of that filling system. My favorite pen BBS is the 355, which is a similar but different enough way. So controversial opinion. I actually think that the 355 does the job better.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because the way that the Conid works is that you have the washer, you go down and then you kind of twist it, you twist it into the position and it gets locked in. So the way that works on the Conid is that there's a slope. So you slide it into the slope, and then you unscrew the rod. In the 355, there's no slope, but instead it's a cross. So there's like a cross, and there are these notches on the bottom, and then you slit them into the notches, and then you can unscrew that. So in a way, I feel like that's a bit more secure for me, at least.
That's interesting.
But again, I think the 355 is a $35-$40 pen. The Conid is, at the retail price, was like an $800 pen. Your particular model is like a $500-$600 pen. So, like, I have a few Conids. I really want a Minimalistica.
You were chasing me, stalking me about this pen.
I was. I actually do have one on order, but it's been a few months. Yeah,
yes.
Few double-digit months. But I want the pen mostly because of the shape, because it's kind of like a tapered shape, and I want to put a tubular nib in it because I think that would look hilarious. But my two regulars, now that I have a king size, I'm going to sell my Conid regulars, and then I just bought actually yesterday two more 355s. So, if I can get like custom caps on these, just because I just don't like the Pen BBS branding, but if I can get custom caps on these, I think they're in many ways, for me, an even better pen.
Yeah, you may want to turn off Instagram direct messages for a few weeks now.
All right. But you also went to another event, I think, today.
Yes. So this was, this was not planned at all. Well, so I wanted to go to Itoya. I went to Itoya because I wanted to buy some planner stuff. So I bought yet another planner, but that's a story for a future episode. But I wanted to get some accessories for my new planner. But then when I went to Itoya, I saw a sign that said there's this pilot event going on in the other building. So I said, well, I'm a pilot fanboy. I gotta see what this is about. So I went to this pilot event, and it was more interesting than I thought it would be. So first of all, they had all kinds of old exotic models on display. They had, some of the very early capless models. They have all kinds of anniversary models, like the Shijin, the 80th anniversary. They have all kinds of exotic Namikis and some even older models. Then they had this build your own Prera thing going on. So we talked before about Itoya's build your own, like Mighty, which is Itoya's own brand, and we talked about how this Sailor Ancora shop has this build your own Sailor Prophet Junior, right? So this was sort of in the same vein as those, where you pick a Prera cap, a section, and a barrel, and you make it however you want, and with the three different nibs available. So that was kind of fun. I didn't buy one, but I like the fact that was offered. But then they had this table where you could measure your writing pressure and your writing angles. They had this special pen. I think you've done this before, but they had a special pen with a cable connected to some kind of machine. And then they give you a piece of paper, and then you write on that. And then they give you a printout that says, here's your writing pressure, here are the average values, and here's your writing angles, and here are the nibs that we recommend based on these results. So I did that, and to my surprise, I have pretty low writing pressure. I thought I was more in the sort of Keiko end of that range, but no, I have pretty low writing pressure, and I write apparently at like 53-ish degree angle, and the recommendations were fine and medium fine for me, which I'm not sure I agree with. You done the same thing before, right?
I have, and it was like medium fine and fine as well. I don't remember keeping my test. I just thought it was like a funny thing.
Yeah.
But I think these tests are like, I think it's good to measure the angle and the rotation. But how hard I write with my nibs depends on what nib it is.
Yeah, definitely.
If I'm writing with a flex nib, right, like I vary between my pressure because I want to make hairlines and then shading. So I don't really necessarily see that as like a fair comparison, but I think regularly it's really meant for like buying your first pen, right? Like, I don't have
not
to buy.
Just that. So one reason why I found this interesting or useful is that, you know, when you go and request a custom nib grind from like Nib Grinder or even from Nagahara, like, from his mail-in service, right? You get like all kinds of questions about how you write and what is your angle and what is your rotation, and you don't know, right? It's
yeah, that part is the most valuable part, right?
Right,
like
because that's sort of the most intimidating part of ordering a custom grind, because now you're all worried, right? What if my measurement is wrong? What if I'm going to get a nib grind that is not actually suitable for me because I measured it wrong? So I am happy that I got some hard numbers that I can use next time I request a custom grind.
Yeah, that's I think it's definitely worth doing, and it's free.
It was free, yes. And interesting, this was done by the pilot's pen doctor.
Yes. These are all done by the pen doctor.
And so since he was there anyway, I decided to ask him some questions. So I asked him the very same question about these ES extra smooth nibs. And he said, first of all, he pointed me to the display, and he said that the extra smooth nibs that were introduced in 2001. And they were like Teban, they were part of the standard product catalog, but only for about 1 year. And the reason for that was that it was so hard for pilot to explain the benefit, the purpose of these nibs. And even when you write with them, the difference between a normal round nib and an ES nib is so subtle, like that. You can't. I mean, it's not that easy to tell what the difference is. So basically, they weren't that popular, and that's why they were quickly discontinued. That's what he said.
I think that makes sense, which is interesting, because then they still have like things like SU, which I don't think is that popular. I mean, when I got a nib ground by Nagahara, one of the customers next to us, asked Nagahara. He was like, because I was getting a medium metallic, and then this other customer was like, do people actually write with those? Like, do they write with italics? And Nagahara kind of just looked at him and was like, yes. But you know, stubs aren't that popular in Japan, so I'm pretty surprised. Yeah.
So I asked the pen doctor one more thing. So I said, so I found this pen with a signature nib, but I can't find much information online about the signature nibs. So what can you tell me about the signature nibs? And he said that, you know, back in the day, you had this lineup with posting and script and manifold and signature. And he explained, the way he explained it, the posting was just a hard extra fine, script was just a hard fine, manifold was hard medium, and signature was just a hard like BB to coarse nib. But
the one that you had wasn't hard.
Well, hard in a sense that compared to the were soft nibs that have not just the Falcon. The Falcon existed, but they were also like, I'm not sure what he called them, but they said they were soft nibs at the time. So hard compared to those.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
But I still, I in hindsight, I should have asked more questions. Or I guess I should have brought my nib, because I think I'm not sure if my signature nib is a bit different. Maybe it's been ground. I'm not sure, but it's not just like a BB or cautioning beat. It has more facets, I think. It's not as round.
Kind
as
of like a zoom
BB.
nib, yeah. Yeah, kind of like a zoom nib.
Exactly. That's for my unexpected Itoya pilot event report.
But it looked pretty fun, actually.
Yeah, it was. I'm tempted to go back, bring some pens and ask him more questions, and maybe actually buy something this time.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about Tono Limbs in Osaka, but not for the event because, as our listeners know, we don't cover Tono Limbs anymore. But for the timing, because what we had remarked almost a year ago to date was that we're seeing this kind of like division between like glass pen people and like, fountain pen people. And at one time, there seemed to be a huge opportunity for like the Wagner crowd to be more inclusive with the younger, more female audience. But there had seemed to be a split occurring. And right about this time last year, we were talking about it. And, Betchori used to be a staple at Wagner, and he's the one that would bring in all of the younger crowds for his mono lettering, right?
Yeah.
This time, they had a Tono Limbs event on the same dates as the Wagner events. So, almost in a way, I'm not sure, I don't think it's deliberate, but almost in a way then splitting the crowd. And I went to Wagner after you, and it was pretty deserted. It's pretty deserted. Lots of vendors had already went home, whereas we compared to the Tono Limbs event, it was very crowded, right? And even our friend went there and bought a glass pen as well. So I'm just wondering, like, the Tono Limbs has pretty good relationships with Lichtope and Morisan as well. But given that Lichtope's audience is actually pretty close to the Tono Limbs audience, I wonder if we're gonna see some kind of a, I wonder if Lichtope is gonna stay with Wagner or move to the Tono Limbs event kind of a cycle.
That would be unexpected, I think, because how close Tomoko is to Mori-san, right? Even if she would want to, even if she thought that for business reasons, that would be the more prudent thing to do. I think it's difficult for her to do that. And
Mori-san also has a hand, I think, in her business. The store is in his office.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. But I think it's just, it's interesting. It's food for thought. I think most of her customers are not like the Wagner type people. So even when I was there, the people who went to Tomoko's desk were mostly the more female audience, whereas the older male audience were all around Mr. Pilot, pretty much only at Mr. Pilot's table.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think Mori-san is at least trying, and you can see that not just because of the fact that, Lichtop's lineup, but also some other tables. There was one table selling some Takasaga premium bank paper
notebooks, yeah.
Right, and there was another table selling these Noto notebooks. Right. And I think there was some workshop. I'm not sure what workshop it was, but there was some. I mean, maybe it's like make your own notebook or whatever it was. So I think that they are trying to mix, the Japanese Black Pen Society type of tables with the news of, and I think it's a good move to lower the entry cost from 2,000 to 1,000 yen.
What I would like to see is Tono Limbs kind of have a cross-pollination, like maybe a collab event with Wagner, to be honest. Not because I'm a fan of Wagner nor Tonal Limbs, but because I think it would do well for the scene. Because Tonal Limbs does collaboration events with Nagasawa, with Kobayashi. So I think hopefully next year they will do some kind of a crossover event. I think that would be really fun. And I think it would help vitalize, give some life back to Wagner as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and I'm overall I'm hoping that there will be a lot more events next year, and that there will be more people. Obviously, the pandemic is probably one reason why the events are more deserted now than before.
Yeah. Although we just talked about 4 events in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's true. By the way, just very quick about that. I haven't seen any announcements related to Inkunuma this year. I wonder if they're not doing it.
We'll have to see, but they were doing the crowd funding last year. Let's see. Maybe we should send a message asking.
Yeah, because we talked about it extensively last year. That was, I don't have the financials. I don't know if it made financial sense for them, but at least it seemed like a very popular event.
Yeah, I agree. All right, we've talked a long time. Let's close it off with some quick thoughts about the Platinum Kinshu, which went on sale on the 1st.
Yeah. And
the Sailor 110th. So we were able to touch them yesterday at Maruzen. What did you think about the Kinshu?
I think you had the most interesting observation that they had the various models in that series lined up, and they were all sold at their original MSRP. So you could see how the price increase year by year, right?
Yeah, and it's like strange because the Kinshu is just 1,000 yen more expensive than the Shun. And I remember when the Shun came out, I was not a big fan of that pen. And they still have it all over in the stores. I think that the Kinshu is going to be not popular as well. Maruzen told me that the Kinshu has been selling very well, and that they think they're going to sell out of this pen, even though they had made more with a less naturally obviously popular color.
That surprises me. I wouldn't expect sort of an orangey red pen to be more popular than a purple one, especially since the pattern is a bit more boring, I think, this time.
Yeah, and you know what? So apparently they arrived at this 4,000 something number because that was the number that was ordered by the retailers. So the retailers had more confidence in this pen. For me, it doesn't make sense. We're going to have to wait until next year to see if their predictions came true.
I think the 2 pens that you see for the highest second-hand price is Kompu and Rocca.
Yeah. And then the Sailor 110th, I remember when it came out, we had a brief discussion about this. And we kind of said, I think the Shirogane looks pretty cool. Obviously, back then there were still renders. Having seen it yesterday, it's like a very shiny silver. Kind of looks like aluminum, and it kind of made it look cheap.
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't really a fan of it to begin with, but I think you had a very interesting observation about the finial, which I think could be very important.
What did I say about it?
The material.
Oh, right. It is the same kind of plasticky material that they used to use for these Theta pens. Now, I'm surprised they use this rather than clear resin, because if you find a Theta pen with one of those plastic finials, or these like, kind of gelatin feeling finials, they are all browned, yellowed, and they look nasty.
They're all nasty, yes.
They are nasty. So, like, I'm pretty surprised they used that material. The floating new logo inside is bigger than I thought it would be. Again, I think this pen is a 1-for-1 copy of the Ohashito, especially the premium with that gold band. But what else struck me was that, first of all, the pen is very uncomfortable to hold because of the step down.
It's a big step down.
Yeah. And the section and the nib look hilariously small.
Yes.
This should have been a KOP.
Yeah, it's not their prettiest anniversary pen. They had done some more interesting ones before, I think.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I guess this closes out the episode. We actually did have more to talk about, but we'll save that for next time. Just because we had to cover 4 events.
We had two main topics that we didn't get to.
Yeah. And now I'm in Hokkaido. I'm in Hakodate. And I'm going to go to Ishida Bunguten tomorrow to see some of the gotoching. So I'm sure we'll be able to talk about that.
There is one in particular. There's some blue-black super sheener that people go nuts about.
All right. I'll see if I can find that tomorrow. But if we have nothing else to add, my name is CY. You can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on Instagram at tokyostationpens, and on Twitter at tokyostationmnh.
And my name is Jacob. I'm Fudefan on Instagram, and on Twitter I have a blog at fudefan.com.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.